ਕਿੱਲੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾ ਬੰਨੀਏ, ਕਿੱਲੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾ ਬੰਨੀਏ ਘਣੇ ਬਿਰਸ਼ ਦੀ ਛਾਂ। ਕਿੱਲੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾ ਬੰਨੀਏ ਆਪਣਾ ਦੇਸ ਗਿਰਾਂ। ਵਗਦੀ ਨਦੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਵਗਦਾ ਉਸਦਾ ਦੇਸ। ਹਰ ਦਿਨ ਸੂਰਜ ਸੱਜਰਾ, ਹਰ ਦਿਨ ਧਰਤ ਨਿਵੇਸ਼। So my name is Navtej Bharati, born in a remote village of Punjab called Rode. When I was 5, I was to become an eye of person who couldn't see. We called him Gyani. And at that time, I didn't know that seeing for others would be my whole life's mission. I think a poet sees for others. The word rishi means seeing for, the word rishi means seer. So at that time I didn't know that poetry would become my whole identity. So after spending 5 years with him, seeing things for him, he taught me so many things. I saw for him, and he showed me how to see others, how to see books, classics. So I read with him most of the classics available at that time. The most prominent one was Ad Granth, and Ad Granth had verses we called Bani from Jaidev, Kabir, Sheikh Farid, and so many other poets of the medieval times. We were 5 brothers and 1 sister, and we all were quite close and well knit. And my parents, although they were illiterate, but they had passion for education. So at the very beginning, when I was 5, I went to that Gyani. But my younger brother and my elder brother, they all are what we call instructed or inspired for the education for the world. So I spent almost 5 years in a Sikh temple, reading and studying classical literatures and other granths. So at that time I felt that the language, my mother language, is a mixed language. It's Braj Pasha, it's Hindi, it's a part of Bengali, because all the writers or all the Bhagats I read, they were from the different language traditions. So somehow I felt the literary language, the language where language of poetry is not a particular language. For example, I don't write in Punjabi, I write in the language of poetry, and that I learned from that time because most of the literature I read at that time was in Braj Pasha. I went to school in grade 5, and that was basically, I didn't have any transcript or certificate for grade 4. So the headmaster of the high school didn't ask those transcripts. He admitted me on the basis of being a poet. So for 5 years I remained in the high school, and most of my poems were published from grade 8 to 10. Most of the poems, and they were published in all the major newspapers and literary magazines, the best magazines of the language. So my prolific period of writing was from grade 8 to grade 10. Then I went with my younger brother Ajmer. We both went to Government College Ludhiana. That was a high profile college. And at that time, I continued writing, and then after 2 years, Ajmer went to engineering, and I went to for my graduation in Mahindra College, Patiala. Patiala was at that time a major city of cultural heritage, and there most of the Punjabi writers usually considered Patiala as their like Tirthasnam, something like that. They usually have a high profile professor, and they mostly it was a central activity for creative writing in Punjabi. So that was the major reason for me to go to Patiala. I did my masters in Patiala, and we found an institution called Putwada, the place or bungalow for the ghosts, and that Putwada was a place for dreamers, a place where we could see reality from non-real platform. Booths are not real. They are neither unreal nor real. So that booth, we were called booths. We were able to see things from the distance. So it was somehow a training for me to see realism, to see what's happening from the non-real platform. So that at that time, what I wrote in the previous years, I felt they didn't match the vision which I was seeing at the Putwadas. So I destroyed most of my writing at the Putwada. Putwada made me see real things. We were reading Jayce's, Malcolm Muhammad Jayce's things. We were reading Mahadevi Verma. We were reading Aka Darya. We were reading Eliot, and so and we were seeing first time we saw Satyajit Ray's film Apur Sansar, and that was eye-opener for us. So Putwada was a training space. Putwada was a space where we could see things from a bit distance. It was the place where we shed realism, shed romanticism. Romanticism was the main tradition at that time, but that made me see that real romanticism was not for me. So in my literary progress, the literary journey, Putwada is a major station where I saw that I don't have any destination but only journey. So Putwada was that training center. At that time it was 1967, I came to Canada and I bid farewell to poetry and creative writing because Putwada was such a shock for me. I was trying to find the proper idiom for me. The idiom I was used to write, I saw that idiom was not proper. So since I couldn't find that proper idiom, or at least I felt I didn't have that idiom, so I left everything there, including writing poetry. I came here and I didn't know what to do. So Ajmer was here in Toronto doing his engineering degree. He had just finished his degree and was looking for a job. Somehow he got a small job at the University of Victoria, and we went to Victoria, BC. There I went to BC and I went to University of Victoria and signed for a course in intellectual history of Europe. That didn't suit me. So after that course, I went to Department of Philosophy, and the head of the department told that it's a real difficult, and I have some suspicion on Indian students. The head of the department told me that students coming from Indian tradition have a different concept of philosophy. We see things, we find faults, we find fallacies in Indian students who come from philosophy. They have some sort of positivist view. They see things in a positive way. We go from the negative to positive. So it is that it would be probably quite difficult for you to change that frame of mind. And I said, let me try. So I took 3 or 4 courses that called preliminary courses, and next year they started masters in philosophy. I was one of the 2 first students to went to philosophy. So I did my philosophy there, and then I thought at that time I felt that philosophy is the answer to most of the problems of the world facing. So the pull of the knowledge was quite strong. Yes, and knowledge is a quite seductive thing. So my creativity took the second place and knowledge came to the forefront. So at that time I really felt that it's the way I should be going. So I tried, I got admission here in London, Ontario, in the philosophy department, philosophy of science. I spent 2 or 3 years, then I found out. Then my first calling of creativity, poetry awoke. And it was quite harrowing time for me to see the conflict, the mental conflict I was going through. One pull was the poetry and the creativity, the other was analysis of the things. So that was the period where I was the most distressed, most scattered, most bewildered, and the final end, poetry. Brief poem in Punjabi, it's called Kille Naal Na Banniye. Kille Naal Na Banniye, Kane Birsh Di Chhaan. Kille Naal Na Banniye, Apna Desh Giran. Vagdi Nadi De Naal Hi, Vagda Usda Desh. Har din Suraj Sajra, Har din Tart Navesh. Difficult to translate this verse. It's a really lyrical, but I'll try. It's a rough English not as musical I feel as Punjabi is, or perhaps every one feels about his mother tongue like me. But this is how rough translation goes. Don't tie the shadow of a tree. Don't peg a shadow of a tree. Don't peg your country, village, and land as the stream or as the river flows, its land or its country flows in the water. Every day the sun is new, and every day every earth is new. Quite a few people has asked me, why do you write poetry? And my simple answer is, it's my swatarm. Poetry makes me who I am. Without poetry, I don't have any identity. So that's the reason I write poetry. But the identity in my poetry is not my egocentric identity. It's the identity of the time or the people about whom I write. So for me, poetry is the salvation of the malice we are facing these days. Poetry takes us out from our mental confines and makes us share things with others. So without poetry is a bond between people. So it's to me it's quite difficult for us to survive without creativity, without poetry. Our first Guru, Guru Nanak, was a great poet, and at what time, in one of his couplets, he says, "Without Shabd, the world will go insane. Bin Shabda Jag Bauranang." So poetry keeps us sane. That's how I write poetry. That's how I'm involved or I'm engaged in the poetry. It keeps me sane. I write poetry because I like things. I like little things. I write poetry because I like how children laugh and how they play and how they fight. I like to write poetry to express their curiosity, the way they see things, they see the rising sun or the setting sun. So I write poetry to celebrate little things, to celebrate me, to celebrate our family of mankind. Poetry to me is the best way to reach other mind. There's a philosophical debate that there is no other mind and there is no way to reach to other mind. But I think poetry is the way to enter into the other mind. So this is one thing that makes me going to write poetry. Poetry is the way I communicate. The standard communication or the non-creative communication stops at the concept of meaning. When someone understands the meaning, they understands the issue. But poetry goes beyond meaning. The poetry starts from the sensation or sensibility and goes through the medium, and again the hearer evoke the sensibility in the readers. So poetry is more than a communication. It makes you feel intensely about the world around you. I don't feel I have a position that I say that do this thing, don't do this thing. But what I feel that if we have to survive, if we were to remain as human beings the way we are, then it's the way of poetry. So start reading poetry, listening poetry, or start writing poetry. It's the poetic word, it's the poetic experience that would keep us going.